I recently had a conversation with former BYU philosophy professor David Call, and we talked about epistemology and general philosophy analogies. We covered a variety of ways to look at the issue, but it revolves around one very important question. What is the foundation of Christian philosophy? Professor Call defined the foundation of LDS philosophy this way. Latter-day Saints hold that reality is the standard of truth, and is therefore objective, not subjective. God himself must abide by eternal laws if he is to abound in the eternal worlds. Nonetheless, God is the creator God, but not ex nihilo, but rather ex materia. As such, we can test our wisdom against reality, to see if it is truly wisdom or only foolishness. If our wisdom harmonizes with the laws of reality, then it truly is wisdom, and if not, then foolishness. The same goes for religious truths, biblical passages, and claims of inspiration. That all sounds reasonable in general, but it depends what kind of test he's talking about, and how we can know those tests are reliable. Professor Call explained the issue a bit more with this basic analogy. In our philosophy class, we begin by drawing out the 5 branches of philosophy in stickman form, with the 2 legs being metaphysics and epistemology, the main body, ethics, and the 2 arms, politics and aesthetics. Since metaphysics and epistemology are the 2 legs of the stick figure, we could start with either leg and still end up with the same philosophy. However, since knowing presupposes being, we choose to start with metaphysics, but we did not start without first laying down 3 epistemological axioms that are self-evident and irrefutable. 1. Existence exists. 2. Conscious is conscious. 3. A is A, the law of identity, which law gives rise to the law of non-contradiction. That is, A cannot be both A, what it is, and non-A, what it is not, at the same time and in the same respect. These 3 self-evident axioms are our epistemological starting points. They are self-evident and irrefutable because any attempt to deny them requires one to rely upon them in one's denial. I'm not denying any of those axioms. Instead, I'm challenging the idea we could start with either leg, metaphysics or epistemology, and end up with the same philosophy. If someone starts with metaphysics, detached from God's epistemology, they are likely to understand reality in some way other than God intended, which in turn will influence the epistemology they develop. Professor Call explained the topic from another angle with a more developed analogy. Take a newborn baby and leave it in the forest to fend for itself, and how long will it survive? An hour? A day? Depends on whether a raccoon, bobcat, coyote, or bear gets to it first. Now let's try this again, only this time leave a Bible, God's epistemology, with the newborn, and see if this makes a difference. Nope. For Bible or no Bible, the child does not survive even a moment longer than before. Now let's try this one last time, only let's up the ante and leave the newborn baby with a Bible, Book of Mormon, and Quran to cover all our bases. Now how long does it survive? Again, not a moment longer than before. The point is that the newborn baby has, first and foremost, a metaphysical reality problem, and it has no capacity to solve this problem on its own. And unless this reality problem is solved, the future epistemological problems of the child never arise. Now, if an atheist woman comes along and rescues the baby and raises it in a nurturing way, then these epistemological issues, including the issue of atheism, would eventually come into the picture for this child. In any case, it was the atheist's epistemology and not the Bible's epistemology that rescued and saved the child from certain death. Now, if man's epistemology is needed for a child to survive and live long enough to gain access to this Bible epistemology, and further, if man's epistemology is not trustworthy, as you say, then the stool that you are standing on, making it possible to reach the Bible, is knocked out from beneath you and all is lost. I guess what I am saying, to shift metaphors, is you have to trust the horse you rode in on, and not simply shoot it once you get there and call it a bad or crippled horse. I confirmed with the professor that the idea here is we need to deal with metaphysics, reality itself, before we get the Bible. So we need to trust the philosophy of metaphysics before we even get to the issue of epistemology. I agree with the basic premise. Without basic ideas of metaphysics, we wouldn't be able to function as individuals, let alone read and discuss philosophy. We need to trust those fundamental principles to an extent. But once we get beyond the basics and start examining our epistemology, it makes sense to review the basics to see if our perception of reality might be flawed in some way. For example, let's extend that analogy a bit more. An atheist woman raises the baby and teaches them various atheist ideas. The baby grows up and eventually visits your church. Wouldn't you ask them to at least reconsider some of the ideas they've learned growing up? Sure, they should appreciate the principles that brought them to your church, but they should also reevaluate their beliefs about God and get rid of false teachings. To mix the two metaphors he mentioned, if you know a baby is lost in the forest and you ride a horse to find the baby, you should certainly appreciate the horse. The baby would have probably died if you didn't have the horse to find it quickly. So the horse was a necessary and sufficient part of the process. However, if the horse starts biting or kicking the baby, you should absolutely shoot the horse, or at least restrain it in some way. If you realize the horse has some major flaw, why would you ignore the problem? Professor Call then tried one more metaphor. You're standing on solid ground, and 60 feet above you is heaven. You notice a 12-foot aluminum ladder lying on the ground next to you, and a large solid shelf some 10 feet in the air above you with a Bible on it. Obviously, the 12-foot ladder is not nearly long enough to reach heaven, but it is long enough to reach the shelf with the Bible on it. So you go to work and rest the ladder against the shelf and climb up the ladder to reach the Bible. Once settled on the shelf, you think to yourself, well, maybe since I'm up here, I can use the ladder to reach heaven. But then you realize this is foolishness because there is not another solid shelf above you to lean the ladder against, and even if there were, you would still be nearly 40 feet short of heaven. Realizing there is no hope of reaching heaven with the metal ladder, you pick up the Bible and sit down on the shelf and read it, study it, believe it, and are willing to do whatever it says, which Bible epistemology and ethics is to believe in Christ, follow his word, and exercise faith in him unto salvation. And so once fully converted you do these, and suddenly out of heaven drops down a rope ladder and into your lap. You leave the shelf and climb up the rope ladder to heaven and are saved. The metal ladder is man's epistemology, i.e. reason, observation, and mind, rational thought. The rope ladder is Bible epistemology, faith, revelation, and heart, inner feelings. Now in this metaphor, the metal ladder, man's epistemology, was needed to get to the shelf, and the rope ladder, Bible epistemology, was needed to get the rest of the way to heaven. And so we see that the metal ladder was necessary for me to get to the shelf, but was not sufficient on its own for me to reach heaven. The rope ladder was necessary for me to reach heaven from the shelf, but was not sufficient on its own to get me to the shelf. And yet taken together, the metal ladder, man's epistemology, and the rope ladder, Bible epistemology, are both necessary and sufficient in getting first to the shelf and then to heaven if both ladders stand up and are applied properly. In philosophy, this is called the necessary and sufficient principle. Now, from a philosophical perspective, we give the primacy to the metal ladder on earth, man's epistemology, over the rope ladder falling from heaven, Bible epistemology. Not because man's epistemology is more important than Bible epistemology, but because it comes first in the natural and proper sequential order of things, that is, in one's effort to at least reach the shelf with the Bible on it. Once we have our hands on the Bible, then Bible epistemology can take us the rest of the way. The ladder analogy seems to assume either there is only one ladder or that it is plainly obvious which ladder is correct, but neither idea makes sense. For the analogy to reflect the wide range of philosophies and religions of the world, there would be many ladders, including multiple leading to different versions of Christianity, and we have data to back that up. In 2007 and 2014, the Pew Research Center conducted a religious landscape study where they asked people of all faiths a wide variety of questions. Here's the data for what all Christians look to most for guidance on right and wrong. In 2014, only 43% of Christians looked to religion for guidance on such a fundamental issue. In 2007, it was only 36%. 4% relied on science, 7% relied on philosophy or reason, and 49% relied on common sense. This looks like good evidence that while most of these Christians may quote from the Bible, many of them approach the Bible with a variety of ladders, a variety of biases and presuppositions. Many critics of the Bible say it's unreliable because thousands of churches read the Bible and disagree, but this data highlights a flaw with that argument. If someone believes philosophy and reason is the primary standard of truth, then philosophy and reason will probably be their primary guidance for right and wrong, and the primary lens they use to interpret the Bible. In that example, disagreements aren't due to the limitations of the Bible itself. No, those disagreements are the result of ideas people bring to the Bible. The same could be said for people who said common sense or science is their guide. Even among Christians who all said religion is their source of guidance, there are still fundamental disagreements about what philosophy we should use to read the Bible. And that in this debate between Protestants and Mormons is a perfect example of that. Each answer to that question represents a different type of ladder people may use to get to the Bible. Since people are reading the Bible with such wildly different lenses, why should we blame the Bible as unreliable when they disagree? The cause of so much division in Christianity is not people relying on the Bible. The division is from people trying to follow God with their intuition and whatever philosophy makes sense to them.